Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. John Carpenter, The Resurrection of Broncho Billy, 1970. John Carpenter earned his reputation as a feature filmmaker with the offbeat gem Dark Star, whilst still studying at USC Film School. What I hadn't known till watching the making-of documentary is that he'd already won an Academy Award for Best Short Subject with The Resurrection of Broncho Billy in 1970. Like his next film, as a student, Carpenter had to be not just director, but also editor, co-writer, and score composer. Broncho Billy is a charming film about a young modern-day man, Johnny Crawford, who's obsessed with westerns from the moment he gets up in the morning. He dresses in the cowboy style and emulates his hero John Wayne in his mannerisms. The story is a day in the life, beginning as his landlady chides him for spending all his money at the movies instead of rent. He goes to sit with an elderly friend who was born at the end of the Wild West era and dresses like Buffalo Bill, regaling him with stories of the legendary figures. After a bartender spoils his saloon role-playing by asking for ID, he is beaten up, as a faggot, by two youths in the alleyway, who take his antique fob watch the old man gave him. At a coffee stand, he tries to impress the pretty barista with the tale. "I've just been in a hell of a fight." "That'll be 26 cents, she replies. While sitting in the park, his luck seems to change when a gorgeous young sketch artist asks to draw him in his regalia. He is at pains to convince her not all cowboys own a horse. When she solicits his approval of her work, his expert knowledge of the period blows it for him. He drawls, cowboy style, "If it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me, but it could be a lot more authentic." The artist politely leaves him after the insult. Suddenly, the film changes from monochrome to color, as, Walter Mitty-like, he rides after her on horseback, sweeps her up, and they ride off like the end of a western mythically across the hills. Broncho Billy is a simple and beautifully shot calling card of the talents of Carpenter and his colleagues, including Nick Castle, John Longnecker, and James Rokos, nicknamed the Super Crew. The cinematography of Castle makes great use of monochrome mood lighting, and the ending looks exactly like an old western's tones. Johnny Crawford as the young man is funny, genial, and nicely captures the slightly sideways walk and the "so long, 2 fingers off the temple, goodbye" gesture familiar from the genre's movies. This is not so surprising, as he became well known as a child actor from the Wild West TV series The Rifleman. The sound design is inventive as well, overdubbing the modern-day street traffic with cattle drive effects. Carpenter's lifelong love of westerns is clear. He often said the style influenced every film he ever made. Sadly, after the film won the coveted Oscar and made his name on campus too, it had a sour aftertaste for him, in that USC claimed ownership of the finished film, since it had been shot using USC equipment and post-production facilities. There was nothing Carpenter could do. Enraged at what he saw as unjust, he felt it ludicrous, and drew a comparison with the idea of art schools claiming to own their great masters' paintings. Dark Star, 1974. Whilst still a USC student, John Carpenter then threw himself into an even more ambitious project with the same crew and the addition of actor, writing partner, technical wizard Dan O'Bannon. The film was to be a longer piece than Broncho Billy, a science fiction movie with dark overtones entitled Dark Star. It would have its own share of trials, but would ultimately be vindicated by posterity much later. Dark Star concerns a crew of 4, technically 5, astronauts in a spaceship armed with sentient thermostellar triggering devices. Their job is to bomb unstable planets to assist in the safety of colonizing others. The overall plot can be summed up as they deal with a rogue, troublesome alien on board, then a bomb that verbally refuses to release itself, and finally blows up the vessel, leaving only 3 survivors. However, within this there is much to enjoy along the way. Firstly, Dan O'Bannon conceived of the crew and the ship design as a used future. He was a huge fan of Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, but hated the spotless perfection of the ship and its interiors. He also wanted the crew to be essentially truckers in space, as he called it. This, coupled with the alien, would later be recycled by him as the film Alien, though to me the men always resembled hippie Woodstock burnouts. They are composed of Lieutenant Doolittle, the bearded, almost afro, dry helmsman played by Brian Norrell, Corporal Boiler, Navigator Cal Cunningham, Talby, Target Specialist Dre Pahich, whose accent was so strong that Carpenter dubbed all his lines, the ship's commander Powell, Joe Saunders, kept in cryo-suspension for advice, and most notably O'Bannon himself as Sergeant Pinback. O'Bannon is a joy to watch. His intensity, grumpiness, and eccentric black humor are marvelous. For example, when he records video diary entries, eerily foreshadowing TV's Big Brother, recalling schoolboy pranks on Doolittle and deadpanning, "I am not Sergeant Pinback. My name is Bill Frugg. Sergeant Pinback's clothes do not fit me." While Talby has opted to spend all his time alone in the dome on top of the vessel, the other three are confined within the ingenious tiny sets, built in any USC rooms the filmmakers could find. They have had 20 years of monotony, and clearly it is Pinback who gets on everyone's nerves the most, with his in-your-face energy and quirkiness. Their duties are utter tedium, with only the occasional frenetic burst of surf music boogieing to enliven the boredom. O'Bannon has 2 wonderful set pieces involving dealing with their non-compliant mascot Alien, literally a beach ball with hand-operated claws, which goes rogue and plagues him, and a superb sequence where he clings dicily to the underside of the elevator as it journeys up and down the huge shaft. The other famous scene is where Norrell is forced to use phenomenology to reason verbally with one of the bombs when it develops an existential crisis and won't exit the bomb bay. Like the counterculture look of the crew, this spoof of the navel-gazing human potential workshop movement is very much a product of the period. Finally, the counseling of the bomb leads it to develop a god complex, and delivering the beautifully understated "Let there be light," it detonates the ship. As Talby and Powell spin off into the blackness, Doolittle, the mournful surfer, spies a board of wreckage and surfs optimistically into evaporation in a wonderful upbeat ending. The sweet simplicity of the ending is also augmented by the ditty Benson, Arizona. I have to admit that most country and western Nashville songs leave me cold, but this is a lovely tune of offbeat hope, juxtaposed against Norrell's final trip. It's definitely one of my favorite film endings. Incidentally, the lyrics by Bill Taylor were a tribute to the named small town where he received generous car breakdown help once on a Christmas day. It's also been asserted that the end of the film borrows heavily from Ray Bradbury's story Kaleidoscope. But hey, if you're going to steal, be inspired by the best. The model effects optical work done by O'Bannon and ship design by Ron Cobb is amazing for the micro-budget they initially had, being composed of 99-cent store items such as ice cube trays. Let's not forget this was enormously ambitious for a student project. Dark Star took 3 years to make, being shot whenever the team had time. The difficulties came really after the initial 16mm cut of the film was finished. Carpenter submitted it to producer Jack Harris, who was appalled by the evident padding in the 68-minute version. The original opening was an interminably dull 5-minute static shot in their sleeping quarters of the lazy crew unwilling to wake up. Their lengthy snoring was explained by Carpenter as being left in to increase the necessary running time to hopefully feature length. Harris told him it was still 15 minutes too short as it was, and at least 30 of the existing minutes were garbage. He gave Carpenter a whopping, to them, $60,000 to create extra scenes and blow up the negative to 35mm for theatrical release. This is how the terrific alien and elevator scenes came to be in the movie, as well as a less welcome sequence of Doolittle playing the loom bottle music instrument. In the end, there are actually 2 versions of Dark Star, an 83-minute cinema release at the time, and later the Carpenter-supervised 73-minute director's cut, where the loom scene was dropped and some of the more primitive effects were enhanced. This is the one I chose to watch on the superb Hyperdrive Blu-ray edition. Sadly, Carpenter and O'Bannon subsequently fell out over misunderstandings as to their future collaborations, hinted at on the terrific Let There Be Light 2-hour documentary on the Blu-ray. They both had strong directorial visions, and would go on to helm their own projects. O'Bannon, as mentioned before, expanded his storyline into the claustrophobic and far more used future griminess of Alien. Carpenter went on to have a string of huge genre hits before returning to his low-budget roots with less success. They were never reunited, right up to O'Bannon's tragic death a few years ago due to Crohn's disease, symptoms of which surfaced and were dismissed as hypochondria during filming of Dark Star. One thing they agreed on, though, was that by expanding this cult hit, they turned one of the most impressive student films ever made into one of the most underappreciated cinema releases. Although fans wildly appreciated its off-kilter humor and ideas at the time, it was many years before college audiences gave it the cult status it has deserved ever since. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.